if you start at age 3, 4, 5, talking about really intimate things and creating this super safe space for talking about things that one might be inclined towards shame over, then you learn how to cultivate a relationship with your kids where you know them and they find it safe to communicate with you. Like when a 13-year-old comes out and the parent says, I had no idea, then I know there's been a pretty significant breakdown of communication at some point.
Yeah.
And so facilitating this talk is important for so many reasons, just to shore up our ability to connect with kids.
Yeah. Hey BLN family, I'm so glad you're joining us today. We have our discussion, Kingdom Culture in Sexuality. This is going to be such an important topic to discuss. We have some key leaders in our environment who are spearheading the movement around this topic, and I'm so excited that you get to hear from them today. Joining me, I have Elizabeth Werning, who is the co-founder of the Change Movement, and Caitlin Zick, who is the co-director of Moral Revolution. Girls, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, wonderful.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, this is such an important topic, and I feel like even now it's vital that we have this conversation as a kingdom-minded movement. So why don't we talk about what is sexuality? What are we referring to when we talk about sexuality? Elizabeth, you go.
Yeah. Well, how we express ourselves intimately. I would say sexuality is focused in our culture today. It's not just what kind of sex you have, who you have sex with, but also, sorry to be...
We're jumping on. Let's go. It's great.
But I mean, how you display your sexuality, but it's also your biological sex, how you perceive your gender, who you choose to partner with, how you navigate relationships with the opposite and the same sex. All of those things together, I'd say, are our sexuality. And I think, anchoring our sense of identity in our sexuality, we separate those somehow in the church. There's this sense of being spiritual but not physical. And we're seeing the outworking of that in our culture in the trans movement, this dualism that's kind of happening, or I like to say virtualization of our identity, where we want to be avatars on the computer and we want to overcome obstacles in our bodies, like using contraception. And so sexuality is also just the reality that I am embodied and that my body has meaning to my personality, to my character, to my temperament, to how I portray myself and the Lord and interact with family.
Yes.
So we are sexual.
Yes, we are.
Mic drop already.
Yeah. Why? That might be obvious to most of our leaders. Obviously, we're kingdom-minded leaders here, but what does the Bible say about our sexuality?
Well, if you start in Genesis, it tells us that God created man and woman and created them together. And you read in Matthew 19, Jesus reflects on man and woman together as image bearers, as a unit. And so Jesus' own teaching was that male and female together have meaning for our understanding of God, and that our relationship together has meaning for our understanding of God. And how we form family, starting in Genesis, but then in Jesus' teaching, how we form and cultivate family out of that relationship should be a manifestation or a symbol or a guide for the kingdom of God. So the biblical anthropology is super clear on God's intention for male and female to be together. And we see it in our bodies, not just kind of ethereally, like our physicality suggests that male and female should be together. And then that icon of togetherness all through Scripture is what we call a biblical anthropology.
I think it's very clear. It's very clear. I think it's important that we have this discussion and talk about what does the Bible say and how do we respond to what society says, because I think it's a different framework and different belief. Caitlin, what do you think that the church needs to be talking about? Or what do we think, maybe let's start with family. What do you think that the family needs to talk about? What's the role of family in talking about sexuality, sexual identity, sex? Like, what do we talk about with families? Tell us about like age groups and when is it good to talk about this stuff?
Yeah, I think what people first could think individually in their own homes, and then we could even speak separately to what leaders should be encouraging families is, right? Because I think historically it's been a silent culture. And so I think so many homes, so many families, and then really so many pastors and churches don't know what to do because they haven't had it modeled for them. So it takes which everybody here is leaders listening in, like it takes some pioneering and a pioneering spirit to be like, okay, I'll go first if I haven't had this modeled well. Or maybe even if it's not modeled well, they actually had the opposite of what would be healthy. So they have to identify what are the roots of why they feel triggered about talking about this, or why they feel like it's shameful or silent, and how to overcome that. So asking themselves and looking at their own roots and assessing what do they want to keep doing that maybe was modeled for them, and what do they want to change and do differently. And looking at that from the personal level and then from a church leadership organization level, I think is really important. So I think historically what we hear, the most common stories are it just wasn't talked about. So you're left to figure it out on your own, or it's just too late, too little, too late. So it's really a lot of like, oh, when I turned 16, my parents said something, but I've already learned and have this entire narrative that the power of first mention is extremely powerful. Not to mention there's probably already been a lot of experiences happen. So I think for parents, we encourage creating a culture of really healthy conversations about it from a young age, cutting out all shame from a young age. I think Chris Valentin was the first one I ever heard teach, like, hey, we don't have like the nicknames for private parts. Like that was one of the base level that I was like, oh yeah, that is something that has almost encouraged shame immediately around body parts, because we go elbow, nose, like hee or hoo hoo, or, like some names that you're like, oh, I'm not allowed to say that encourages shame. So from body parts to teaching body safety and awareness at a young age, even just moms and dads in the home, a lot of parents don't know what the line is with their own PDA. Like, hey, like it's okay to encourage children. We love each other like mom and dad. So encouraging just healthy conversations around sexuality, marriage, love from a really young age. But then when it comes to, I think one of my biggest passions definitely is the conversation around what they're seeing. And that can start really young. And that's where we're doing our children and the next generation such a disservice if we're staying silent on that topic. Because I think that's what we're talking about, is this narrative of we live in a hypersexualized culture. There's no way to get around it. So whether they're watching YouTube Kids, Disney Junior, or they're shopping at the mall and there's a Victoria's Secret ad, like they are seeing things that they weren't meant to see. Yeah. And so if we're not just equipping kids out of our own fear of, oh, they're too young, I don't want to steal their innocence, like we have to be able to, a simple narrative is good pictures, bad pictures. Like you're going to see good things, you're going to see bad things. Here's what you do when, and really just establishing that parents, leaders, trusted adults in their life are the safest people to go to, not their peers, not the Google bar, but really knowing like this is a healthy conversation. It's not something to be afraid of.
Yeah. And when you say talking to kids at a very young age, there's age-appropriate conversations,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And I know you guys have resources as well.
We do. So that was one of our hugest passions, and also Chris's, was to create resources for leaders of when your kid is 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, what are those age-appropriate conversations? I think sometimes, too, we defer to, like, I don't know, I don't want to mess up my kid. Or it's like this overwhelming parenting so hard, I'm just going to put the sexuality talk off as long as possible because I'm dealing with, anger and fighting with siblings or, school issues. So you're like, I'm not even thinking about that. So there's really a beautiful tool. It's Parent Well that Moral Revolution has created It's with Lauren and Jason Valentin, Chris Valentin, Danny Silk, and we actually got the author of God's Design for Sex series, which that's what he created, Dr. Stanton Jones. He is incredible, very, very intelligent psychologist, counselor, and wrote these tools in the 90s, but they've even been updated to just make sure, first of all, the illustration and everything's updated for kids to really enjoy, but it's tools and resources for every age bracket. And we ask really hard questions. We say, what was the home you had? What's the home you have? Really assessing it. And then what's the home you want?
Okay.
And helping them know. And what I think for parents, and the reason I love the book so much is I'm like, it takes the guesswork out. You're not having to sit and think, I have to research for hours what to talk to my 6-year-old about. Just read this book with them and leave it. It's not some special book that stays tucked away. Put it on their bookshelf so they know this is just a normal conversation about the story of you and how God created you and how God uses mom's body and how God uses dad's body. And it just definitely goes along with what they're hearing then when they're 10 and 12 in middle school. And it progresses with them. It gives the parents the language and the tools to really show their kids that we do this together. You don't have to go figure it out on your own. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. I think one of the keys there is too, and just to reiterate, you've said this, but I'm going to be really clear, is casting vision for what's right.
Yes.
Because I think we tend to, in the space of, I don't want to talk about it, it's easier to say, we don't like that, or that's bad, but we don't really have great language for this is the ideal.
Yeah.
And what we need to be communicating to kids is, here's the vision for your life, your identity, and your sexuality.
Yeah.
And I think one of the breakdowns that I often see, so I focus mainly on the gay community, the LGBT experience, and one of the breakdowns I often see is this disconnect between parents and kids. So I can't tell you the number of parents who come to me, their child at 13 or 14 has now come out, and the expression the parent has is, I had no idea. And so now suddenly this bomb has just been dropped. And if you start at age 3, 4, 5, talking about really intimate things and creating this super safe space for talking about things that one might be inclined towards shame over, then you learn how to cultivate a relationship with your kids where you know them and they find it safe to communicate with you. And that breakdown is part of why so many kids are coming out. They haven't had an intimate connection with their parents where they could be fully seen. When a 13-year-old comes out and the parent says, I had no idea, then I know there's been a pretty significant breakdown of communication at some point.
Yeah.
And so facilitating this talk is important for so many reasons, just to shore up our ability to connect with kids.
Yeah.